So today we're going to continue our video about the plan, and then we'll work a few exercises in your workbook to get you ready for building that plan. As I discussed before, if you remember though, that this is the same format, the same ideas that we used when we did the inference paper, where we copied and pasted that template from Education Perfect. And you can use that same template, that same idea. So you all have your old papers and you have those exemplars, and we'll look at several exemplars of this. The big difference here being that you are going to be collecting your own data, and you're going to be then talking about how that experiment went and reflecting on some things from the data collection, etc. So keep that in mind as we go. You're not going to see much difference here in the plan and in the writing of the report with those caveats that I just mentioned. So let me go to the video. And it's not going to be queued to the right spot, but let me get it there. 704 is where we ended. So she was talking about the plan, and we're just going to continue that. Here we go. A little bit of overlap, but that's not bad.
Another factor we need to think about is variability. So we want to minimize the variation, okay? We want to have as low variability as possible. And that's where we come into controlling all the things that we can possibly control, so that the only variation left is the variation due to the experiment itself, not due to other factors.
Okay, so when she's talking about that variation, you're going to see that we're going to go into a classroom and perform an experiment, and so you need to really think about the kinds of things that you can control, right? Do you need to have the girls sit apart? Do you need to make sure that they have the right materials for to deal with the experiment? What kind of things are there in the experiment that you can control to minimize the variability? Now, there won't always be things that you can control, and there are going to be several things that you think you've controlled, but then you haven't. So keep that in mind as we develop our plan, because you need to make sure that you deal with any variability as best you can, but you need to be aware that you will be talking about what you could and what you could not control. Okay?
Last piece here is on replication. Okay, if we can get, this is not always going to be possible, but when it is possible, it's quite good to be able to do the test several times for each person doing the experiment, to be able to get a replication of those results. Okay, and that gives us much more information about the variation.
Good to know, but you're not going to need to deal with it.
So let's just have a look at this random allocation in a little bit more detail. So when we're comparing two groups, we want to have all...
Now this part is very important, so think about some notes that you can take about these, and look at the things that she's explaining, because you will be having to deal with random allocation of the groups.
All of these different things, all the characteristics to be the same. So how do we do that? Well, the simplest way is to have a piece of paper, or group piece of paper with either A or B written on it. And if a person, and then I have them all shuffled up, if a person receives an A, they're in group A. If they get a B, they're in group B. And then I decide, right, group A is my treatment or my control, and group B is the other one. So I could do it that way. I could also use a deck of cards. If they get a black card, that means they're in treatment group. If they get a red card, they're in the control group. I could toss a coin. If it's heads, that means. If it's tails, that means. So there's lots of different ways that you could do that. And there's a little example there of some instructions that I would give to do that. Okay, but 30 students.
Okay, so let's look at this. So I have 30 students I want to put in two test groups. Select 15 black cards from a deck. This represents group 1. So the people who got a black card get there. But notice I selected the 15 black cards from a deck of cards. So you have to make sure that it's equally likely they'll be put into these groups. So if you have 30 students, then you need 30 cards. Half of them black, half of them red. Okay? Right, so she selected 30 cards and then shuffled the cards to make sure that they're mixed up well, and then give everybody a card or let them draw. They would prefer to draw since we're going to be experimenting probably on year 7s and 8s. And then give each card and move them into the tree groups. I'm sure she's going to go over that too, but you'll hear it twice. Not going to hurt
Put
you.
15 black cards representing group 1 and 15 red cards representing group 2. Shuffle them up so they're randomly mixed. And that's important so that I know that you've identified how we're going to make them random. And then I give each student a card. If it's this, they do that. If it's this, they do that. And move them into the right groups.
Now, pay attention to how she's written this out and talked about each thing. Now, because this is exactly what you're going to have to do when you describe how you allocated each student to a group. So if you did the cards thing, then you need to talk about that. If you had them roll a die, then you need to talk about that. So whatever method, or if you use your calculator or a computer to pick random numbers, doesn't matter, but you need to be able to describe it. One of the pieces of the paper is how you chose those students to be in a particular group.
Okay. Another thing to think about is our sample size. To count data, we want to have usually at least 50. Measurement, the golden rule is at least 30. And this is talking about the sample sizes in each group. So when we actually come to do this experiment, it's not always going to be possible to get to this number. Sometimes it depends on how many students are actually there on that day. If we've only got 15 students in the class on that day, that's all we're going to do the experiment on. So this is what our goal is, if you like. We want to aim to get at least this much information. We may or may not actually get to that point, but that's what our goal is. Okay.
Okay, now let's talk about that just a moment, though. So notice that she was giving you numbers, and we talked about this before. When in order for our sample to be statistically significant and get the results that we want, we need a large enough sample. But again, that's not always possible. So what you can do is you can say, for this particular treatment, I recognize that I should have a total of 50 students. However, we were only allowed to have these 3 classes, which means they add up to be this many students. So you won't probably be able to reach the number that you really need to be able to make it significant. But as long as you know what you should have and then describe why you don't have, then it's still fine. But you need to make sure that you're talking about each of those pieces. Okay, here we go.
We need to look at how we're going to record that data. So we're going to have one column of data. So we're going to set up a spreadsheet that has one column which tells us which group they are in, and one column which has the measurement that we make. So if it's their height or their weight or how far they could jump or whatever it is that we're measuring. One column with which group, and one column with what we're measuring. So, if we're talking about look at our example now of our dominant league. So our experimental units, what are they going to be? Well, in this case, our experimental units are students in the stats class in 2016. So I've been quite specific about who that is. I've got to define my treatment variable. And remember, what I'm doing now, sorry, I should have said, is I'm just going back up to page 11, top of page 11, is these are the things I must have in my plan. So I'm just going through this list and making sure I've got all of those pieces there. Okay, so my treatment variable is my second thing. So my treatment is the group of students going to be standing on the non-dominant leg, and the control group is the group who will be standing on the dominant leg. So I've defined both of my groups. I've defined who's going to be what my treatment group is and what my control group is. I then need to define the response variable. So what's the response that we're going to check? So in this case, I'm measuring the length of time that they can stand on that leg. And I'm going to measure it using a stopwatch. So I'll see what tool I'm going to use. And I need the units. I'm going to be measuring it in seconds.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to stop you there again. Look how specific she's being, and this is exactly how specific you will have to be when you do your experiment. You need to explain this in great detail. How exactly you're going to measure it. Not, I'll watch how the students do. It's got to be very specific. If you're going to use any tools, any accessories of some sort to be able to do that, you need to explain that.
And ideally, I want to get students to repeat this twice. Okay, I don't know whether that would be possible, but that's what I'm going to aim to do.
Unlikely, but we'll try.
Then I need to describe the random allocation. So I'm going to decide how am I going to randomly allocate them. So I'm going to divide that. I'm going to take the sample size of how many people are in the class, divide it in half, and if a student gets an A or a B, then that I need to explain what that means. Okay, so here I've said I'm going to randomly shuffle them, and this is now talking about the blinding part. I'm not going to tell the students whether they're in the treatment group or the control group. Once they've been given a piece of paper that says A or B, then A will stay in the room while B goes outside. Then they'll swap over, and it won't be until after the experiment that they know whether they were the control or the experiment group.
I'm going to stop right there and tell you, so what she's doing here, this is an exemplar. She's showing you exactly what needs to be in your paper for this particular thing, and this is an excellence paper. So if you have all of these, think about all of these different things as you go, so you can use her template here to be able to write yours. Think about what she's written.
So for the purposes of this experiment, I'm going to make Group A the treatment, and they will be standing on their non-dominant leg. When Group B will be the control group, and I'll have them standing on their dominant leg. And then I'm explaining why I'm doing this, and this is good for our merit. I'm randomly allocating them because, and I'm giving an explanation of why I do that. Then I need to say, well, how am I going to collect my data? Well, I'm going to have a stopwatch on the whiteboard, and students, I'll need to give them some instructions so that they record the time that they were able to stand on their leg before they fell over, and they're going to write it on that same piece of paper with the A or the B written on it. And at the end, those students will give me those pieces of paper, and I'm going to record them, and I give an example of the table that I would use to record it on.
Now, having that raw data is part of the experiment. So however you gather the data, whether they record their own times or you have people in your group record those times, that raw data is critical to the experiment. You need to have it. Then you'll organize it into your chart so that you can use New Zealand Grapher to be able to do the analysis.
The last piece that we need is looking at what factors are we going to control. So here's some things that I'm going to control. I'm going to make sure that the instructions are given clearly so that the students know to watch the stopwatch. Okay, we don't want them being distracted and talking to each other, and then a few seconds passes after they've stopped before they remember to look up at the screen and record the time. So I want them to be quite accurate with their timekeeping. I want to make sure that no one falls over and knock over another person, so that means I'm going to make sure that they're standing at least an arm's length away from each other. And so you'll notice I'm saying, well, I think that they should do this because, and I'm giving the reason why. So I'm telling about why I'm going to control it. And that's what we want to see for our merits. And again, another third one there, I'm going to talk about how they hold their foot, so that everyone in the room is consistent in how they position their foot, so that we don't get any differences due to positioning of their foot. And that is our plan.
Okay, so that gives us an idea of what you're going to be working with your plan. And you'll see that the biggest part of it is describing what you're going to be doing in the experiment to make your plan work. So in this particular experiment, internal, the plan is one of the biggest parts. In the past, the plan was, I'll measure this using the data that I was given, so you don't really get that much detail. But in this case, you're going to have lots of detail. So you need to practice that. So what I'd like you to do is use, from your workbooks, do those pages 11 through 18 and read those and see what exercises that she gives you to work on with those. And of course, go back and rewatch the video if you need to. You all have access to this. I gave you this page. You can just click on it, save it, do whatever you need to do to go back to it. Really make sure you're understanding what's happening. Okay? So I'm going to come back to you guys. All right. Oh, good. We ended up with 16. That's good. All right. So any questions about creating your plan or worries, concerns to this point?
I was just wondering, like, as an estimation, if we got out of lockdown, like, when exactly would be sitting and, like, testing for this internal?
You're going to get excuse me. You're going to get a day. As far as an estimated time, I have no idea. We'll wait until we finish the lessons. We want to finish it as quickly as we can, simply because we want to be able to give you time to review for your practice exams. But if that's so, if depending on lockdown times, if we go back to school quickly, then we could theoretically get this done before we start reviewing for the revisions. That would be a nice thing to happen. But again, it's just going to depend. You're going to get, as far as this internal goes, you'll get a day to work with your group to build a plan. You'll get a day to work with your group to do the experiment, and then you'll get a day for you alone to work on your analysis and conclusion. So you're going to get 3 class periods. Now, could that happen after and when we come back in term 4? Possibly, but we'll just have to see what happens, because we don't want to mess up your practice exams with this. But hopefully we'll get this done first. Does that help at all?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Okay. What my goal is to get this done so that we can then spend all the rest of that time doing revision for the math and for any other courses you might have need the time for. Okay. All right. So,
Mr. South,
yes.
can we, that template that she just gave, that exemplar,
Yes.
can we, literally just fill in the blanks, take out, or is that not allowed?
Kind of, but you can use it to make sure that you're describing those things, but it's not as much fill in the blank on this one, because it's going to depend on what your experiment is, and you don't know what that is yet. So you can work on with your group and use her template, and then make sure that you are describing in at least as much detail as she did. And that would be fine. But this one's going to be this one would be a little hard to fill in the blank. Now, there are going to be some sentences like the question, "I wonder if blah blah blah." That's very fill in the blank. You're exactly welcome to do that and write to. You should. But as far as the describing things, you could use her template to make sure that you have at least as much detail as she has, because that will get you the excellence. We'll be counting up you need to say, these are the 3 things these are the 3 things I controlled for. These are 3 of the things that happened that I didn't expect. So you see kind of how we'll be counting those up. If you list 1, I think that's achieved. 2 is merit, and whatever. Or 3 is merit, because that's not an excellence type question on those. But if you follow exactly what she does on the whole thing, it's an excellence paper. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
So, you're welcome. So just make sure you have at least as much detail as she does.
Mr. South?
Yes.
If we end up going back to school on Wednesday, would you be our teacher, or?
Yes. I didn't. I thought I'd talk to you about that, but yes. My flights have been moved out again, so I am not. I'm going to be at QMC at least until the 17th. So what I'm hoping to do is get you to the because the new practice exams are scheduled to start on that Monday the 20th. So I want to get.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to get to that point at least. You
Okay,
betcha.
cool.
So yeah. Anything else, guys? Okay. Alrighty. Well then, let's